This is an LA Times Studios podcast.
My name is Sammy Roth, and I'm the climate columnist for the Los Angeles Times. This is Boiling Point. Despite its reputation as America's most climate-friendly state, California has a lot of traffic-clogged freeways, and cars that run on gasoline, and sprawling suburbs that force people to drive their gas-guzzling cars very, very long distances to get from their houses to their jobs and back. To be fair, most of those freeways were built before we fully understood the dangers of global warming. And there are more electric vehicles per capita in California than in any other state. And our politicians, they're doing a lot of good work to enable the construction of solar and wind farms to power our electric vehicles. But nobody is pretending that any of it is enough to confront the climate crisis. California needs to look a lot different in the future than it did in the past. We especially need to reimagine Los Angeles and the San Francisco Bay Area. We need a lot more public transit, a lot more apartment buildings near public transit, a lot more electric vehicle chargers fueled by clean energy, and a lot less time sitting in traffic on the 405. If you live here, that might all sound impossible, but it's got to start somewhere. And that's why some state lawmakers are talking this year about permitting reform. If you haven't heard that term before, it basically means making it easier to build stuff, which you might think would be a political no-brainer, until you realize that permitting reform can mean limiting environmental reviews for construction projects and possibly limiting opportunities for public comment. The easier it is to build a wind farm or a housing development or a train, the more likely it is that a group of people in the path of construction or an endangered species might see their lives change dramatically. And sometimes, maybe that's okay. Sometimes, it's definitely not okay. If you've been listening to this podcast for a while or reading my columns, you've probably heard me say that fighting climate change is full of trade-offs. But regardless, there are definitely opportunities, if we do this carefully, to make life better. Opportunities to build healthier, happier, more vibrant cities while minimizing damage to the environment or public health. This week, I'll be talking about some of those opportunities with Carter Rubin. He serves as Director of State Transportation Advocacy for the Natural Resources Defense Council, or NRDC. Like me, he grew up in West LA and has spent way too much time sitting in traffic on the 10, a lot of it going to Dodger Stadium. He's got an important perspective on how housing and transit play into dealing with climate change and on the permitting reform bills being debated in Sacramento.
Hi, my name is Mary Knopf, and I'm a producer on Boiling Point. We are here with Joanne O'Neill, Director of Customer Programs at Clean Power Alliance. Hi, Joanne.
Hello.
Can you tell us a little bit about Clean Power Alliance?
Yeah, so Clean Power Alliance is the not-for-profit electricity provider for 3 million residents and businesses across Los Angeles and Ventura counties.
What renewable energy options does CPA offer its customers?
So Clean Power Alliance offers customers a series of choices between lean power, clean power, or 100% green power to ensure that people have the option to choose a rate that's right for them and maximize their renewable energy.
Well, thank you so much for speaking with us, Joanne.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Take the next step in building a more resilient and clean energy future for Southern California. To learn more, please visit cleanpoweralliance.org/power-response. Again, that's cleanpoweralliance.org/power-response.
Carter, thanks very much for being with us on the Boiling Point podcast.
It's great to be with you.
So you and I have talked before. It's been a little while, but definitely followed the work you do at NRDC and enjoy reading your tweets or Blue Sky posts now, I guess. I read this quote from you recently in a story about permitting reform. There's this package of bills in the legislature that would make reforms to state law, to the California Environmental Quality Act in particular, to try to make it easier to build a lot of stuff in California. Housing, electric vehicle chargers, clean energy facilities, a whole laundry list of things. You had this quote that really jumped out at me in this story. You said, We certainly would not support streamlining highway expansion or sprawl development that impacts ecosystems. It's really important that the legislature focuses on shovel-worthy projects, not just shovel-ready projects. And I thought that was such an interesting and cool formulation because people are always talking about shovel-ready projects. You've got to, if something is ready to go, government's got to make it as easy as possible to build this thing. But then you added in this twist of it's not just something that's shovel-ready, it's got to be shovel-worthy. Expand on that a little bit.
I think what it reflects is the fact that we're at this pivotal moment where we really feel like we need to step on the gas and build a lot more of the kinds of beneficial projects that are going to help with our environment or our housing affordability. But we've done things a certain way for a century. We've built out fossil fuel infrastructure. We've built out highway expansion infrastructure. And so a lot of what is in the pipeline that could be accelerated because it's been studied or it's been planned, it's been funded, are projects that reflect priorities from last century. And so simply speeding up everything that's already ready to build is going to push through a lot of projects that are going to harm the environment and harm communities. And so when we get into the legislative process discussing how do we streamline or accelerate the build out of the good kinds of projects that we all want to see, we have to contend with both what's already in the pipeline and make sure we're not pushing through faster projects that are going to work against our climate goals or our clean air goals. But also we need to contend with interests that are supportive of the kinds of infrastructure that we have concerns about. So people who want to build suburban sprawl out into the urban wildland interface.
Which is bad for wildfires and creates more vehicle miles traveled, more driving, threatens sensitive habitat for endangered species, stuff that maybe is not so good.
Exactly. It's not where we want to be building more housing. We need a lot more housing, but not in places where the people who live there are going to be at risk or it's going to put more traffic on our roads. So, but the proponents of that kind of development, suburban sprawl building industry, is going to be showing up in the legislature saying, oh, but actually we need this too. And so that's where we try to put guardrails around what is shovel-worthy, meaning, yes, we need to build things more quickly. I think we all agree about that, but we need to make sure it's the kinds of projects that are, helping Californians get around more affordably, housing near jobs and schools, green infrastructure, but without the impacts on ecosystems and neighborhoods and the places we need to protect.
Why is it so hard to separate, permitting reform to make it easier to build good stuff and permitting reform that also makes it easier to build stuff that we don't want from a climate perspective, bad stuff?
When you start to open up a conversation about changing state laws that protect the environment, you invite a lot of players to come in and try to make the case for what kinds of projects they think are, shovel-worthy. Everyone thinks the projects that they support are shovel-worthy. Mm-hmm. And as environmentalists, that has a definition for us. But, there are other people who have real cachet in the Capitol who, think we should be building, more fossil fuel pipelines and different projects that, are going to have environmental impacts. And so we know that when that conversation gets open, we need to not just be elucidating what are the changes that would enable the good stuff, but being ready to defend people crowding into that conversation saying, oh, yeah, but, we do need this one more natural gas power plant. So,
right.
It's hard. We're trying to hold the line. I think one example of where we've seen this starting to work out is in California, the state has prioritized clean transportation projects within existing cities on existing city streets and basically said, if we're building dedicated bike lanes or light rail in the middle of a city street, those are projects that we know are intrinsically good for the environment. They're going to clean our air. They're going to reduce the burdens of traffic on communities. Those are things we need to build quickly and efficiently. And so the legislature has already, in California, passed laws that exempt a lot of those kinds of projects from the strictest reviews. But we really need to ensure we're not applying the same kind of logic to a major highway expansion project where adding lanes to freeways like we saw with the widening of the Sepulveda Pass now 10 years ago, it was full of car traffic the day it opened. And a study from USC found that traffic was actually worse than before construction started. So I think we have a chance in California to start moving in the right direction. And a report from some of our allies at Spur in San Francisco found that over 90 projects have been accelerated. These are, bike and pedestrian-oriented projects, transit projects that are in existing communities on city streets that are moving, quickly, and we're able to make the investments, help people get around without having to get in their cars.
And the problem that you're describing, that these freeway widening projects tend to just lead to more congestion. You add more lanes. This has been known historically for a really long time. You add more lanes, it just leads to more traffic. Congestion eases, and then it just adds to more people driving these routes, and then congestion gets worse again. It doesn't really solve any problems. This is happening right now at a really heavily trafficked corridor, the I-80 corridor between Sacramento and Davis, outside of the California capital. Talk about what's been going on there, because NRDC, as I understand it, is involved in a lawsuit related to that goes to trial pretty soon. Talk about what's happening on Interstate 80.
Yeah, so this is a major corridor between the San Francisco Bay Area and Sacramento. And over the last decades, Caltrans has been widening various stretches of this corridor. And they are now coming to this part of I-80 that is called the Yolo Causeway. And it's a long bridge structure that goes over the Yolo Bypass Wildlife Refuge. And they're planning to widen the freeway from 6 lanes in total to 8 lanes by adding 1 lane in each direction. And they're actually right now out there strengthening and widening the shoulders of the freeway to accommodate the new lanes. We are advocating that Caltrans should be prioritizing different kinds of investments to solve the core problem, which is that people are getting stuck in traffic, goods are getting stuck in traffic. We need to provide different ways for people and goods to move so that we're not getting stuck in traffic. We don't think adding 1 more lane in each direction is going to accomplish that.
Because ultimately, there's just going to be more traffic, and you're going to have the same problem all over again 3, 4, 7 years down the road or something like that.
Yeah, and they've called it the iron law of traffic congestion since the 1960s. What we know happens is, in the short term, people see that traffic's flowing a little bit better, and they say, okay, well, I was planning to go to a different location, but now that I can go on I-80 because it's got 1 more lane, I'm going to go in that direction. And I'm going to take my car and I'm going to drive by myself. And I'm actually going to drive at rush hour, even though previously I would have tried to avoid it. I would have gone in the middle of the day. So people adjust the time of day, the mode, the direction, until the road is back at full capacity. It reaches this equilibrium where it was previously. Because we know that when the road is congested as it is now, that is discouraging people from driving during the congested times. So you add a little more space, and then the people who used to be discouraged, I say, okay, well, now I'm going to drive more at rush hour. And they also, drive instead of walking or biking or taking transit. So that all happens in the short term, like 0 to 5 years after the project opens. And then in the long run, they might say, well, my commute's a little bit faster, so maybe I'll move a little bit further away from where I work. So people make these longer term decisions about where they work, where firms are located, until we just end up back where we started. And I think this corridor is really illustrative of the problem of priorities that Caltrans has, where directly parallel to it is the Capitol Corridor commuter rail service that runs from Auburn down to Sacramento to Davis, Martinez, down to Oakland. And this is a busy rail corridor. The last time I rode it, I was riding from Oakland up to Sacramento, and I shared a table with someone who works for BART, someone who works...
Bay Area Rapid Transit, for those who don't live in the
That's
Bay
right.
Area or haven't spent a lot of time there. Yeah.
The transit system. Also at our table was a special ed teacher and someone who works for the Alameda County Courts. And we had this crack-up conversation just over happy hour beers on the train on our commute back to home. And for them, they were commuting into the Bay Area from Susan City, Martinez, and these suburbs of the Bay Area. And the Capitol Corridor is pretty good as far as transit goes in California. But, if you're not commuting during rush hour, there might only be a train every 2 hours. And it runs on polluting diesel locomotives that the state has said we need to retire because they had put carbon pollution in the air and particulate matter in communities. And this train corridor runs directly next to I-80 on a separate bridge, within a stone's throw of the corridor that they're widening. And so if Caltrans had its priorities right, it would have thought through, okay, we could make the transit rail connection from Sacramento to Oakland in the Bay Area as good as a transit connection in the northeast of the U.S. Or in Europe. We need to electrify our rail system so that the trains are cleaner and they can travel faster. We need to double track various sections. So there's 2 tracks, so trains don't have to wait for each other if they get to a choke point. All of these things would dramatically improve the lives of the people who are riding the rail system and would make it so compelling and such a good service that drivers would want to opt out of congestion and take the train for when that's a viable option. And, growing up on the west side of Los Angeles, I lived in a part of LA where to go anywhere, you had to cross the 405 or the 10 freeway. And every street that crosses those freeways is jammed.
And we both, by the way, still live in parts of LA where you have to do that. It's
That's true.
To avoid.
I haven't moved far from home. And the one thing that has made a difference is the E line, or what I'll probably always call it the Expo line, because that's what it was when it first opened.
It's just like the crypto.com arena will always be the Staples Center.
Exactly. And, for my dad, it'll always be the Hollywood Freeway and the Santa Monica Freeway, and not the 101 and the 10. So, the E-line is just the one thing that can zip by traffic. And so I think that's the model we advocate Caltrans is looking for. And so when they tried to proceed with this expansion of I-80, which is going to pile a lot more cars onto the freeway and into communities, we challenged them in court, saying that their analysis under the California Environmental Quality Act was flawed. We raised a bunch of reasons why. And 2 of the most important for us was the fact that they weren't mitigating the impacts of all this additional driving. They're supposed to. The law requires it. Their guidelines tell them how to do it. But they're only mitigating less than half of the additional driving through investments in some bus service and transit incentives. But they sort of said, well, we didn't budget enough money, so we can't afford to do any more mitigation. And then the other concern is that they didn't study all these different alternatives that would have given Californians ways to opt out of traffic rather than just adding more lanes.
So 2 things, a bunch of things I want to follow up on, but 2 for now. One, you said the rail line is within a stone's throw of the I-80 freeway, and anytime I hear anyone use the expression stone's throw, I want to test that out. So next time I'm up there, my in-laws live in Davis, so I actually do spend quite a bit of time stuck in the traffic jam created by the construction going along on this corridor that you're suing over. So next time I'm there, maybe I'll get a stone and see if it's actually close enough to test out your turn of phrase.
Yeah, to be fair, maybe I'm thinking like Mookie Betts throwing a stone.
Okay, I don't quite have his arm strength. If you were in right field, I'd love to see him make some great throws to third base. I'm not sure how I feel about the shortstop experiment, but that's for another podcast. Just for context, because we haven't said this yet, transportation is, in California and nationally, the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions of climate change pollution. In California, I think it's 40% or close to 40% of emissions. Most people, I think, who associate transportation and climate change are thinking mostly about, electric cars are the solution to that. Just big picture, why is public transit and bike infrastructure for biking and buses, why is that so important? Why is it not enough to just say, electrify all the cars and keep doing things exactly the way it's been done? Why does transit and also housing. Housing is a climate issue, and thinking about how we design our cities around transit and around changing the way we get around. Why is that important? Why is it not enough to just take everything we have now and turn it electric?
I think there are really 3 things. One is affordability, one is quality of life, and one is climate change. And I think, you can elevate the urgency of each of those in any given moment. On the affordability side, the cost of car ownership is increasing across the board. And
tariffs will help with that, though, right?
Tariffs will put cars even further out of reach. And, we're having challenges in the insurance market, and car insurance is getting more expensive. And in terms of quality of life, some of the most desirable places to live in our region, across our state, are places where people can walk to amenities and walk their kids to school. We don't build a lot of places like that. And the places we do have that are walkable or bikeable are sometimes unaffordable. And so building more walkable communities centered around public transit investments helps with affordability, helps with the quality of life. Just like not having to get into a car just increases everyone's happiness points, by a lot. And
I've never been unhappy sitting in traffic. I don't know what you're talking about. Never happened.
I spent so much of my life in Southern California in traffic, and I got my driver's license at 16, and I think it just scarred me forever. And so now I do whatever I can to not sit in traffic. And last, as you mentioned, climate change. So we need and electric cars and, all these options that help people drive less. Just the sort of sheer carbon math shows that a feasible phasing down of gas-powered vehicles, an ambitious phase out with our, no new gas vehicles sold by 2035 state policy is still going to also require us to help people get around outside of their car, using zero carbon tennis shoes and bicycles and all electric clean buses.
Yeah. I know we were joking about sitting in traffic and how, fun / actually horrible that is, but it is interesting to think about the history of the freeways, here and in places like New York and across the country. I mean, those were built at a time, a lot of them in like the 50s and 60s when you could really just build something with impunity, and it was so much easier. And that was bad. I mean, and I think that's clearly why there's, we have laws like CEQA and the National Environmental Policy Act today to force government agencies to really go and study things and give the public opportunities for input. I guess how do you think about that balance between wanting to make sure that sort of the sins of the past aren't repeated and a lot of the environmental injustice, I should say, that was done where, freeways were bulldozing through communities of color and low-income neighborhoods, especially here in Los Angeles, and the sort of pollution impacts that live on with that today versus knowing that, a lot of the legacy of that is sort of creating impediments for, building things that are needed and important and can ideally be done in a way that, help people. It's a hard conversation, but I'm just curious how you think about it.
Well, I'm going to answer your question with a question.
Please.
Is the 105 freeway a stone's throw away from where we're sitting?
That's a good question. We are here at the LA Times office in El Segundo, and I think Mookie Betts might be able to throw a baseball at it
from the roof of this building.
If he was recovered from his norovirus or whatever he lost 20 pounds from. I don't know how he's feeling today, but we're very close to the 105 freeway, yes.
And that's like the poster child for what you were just describing, which is why I wanted to bring it up. That was a freeway proposed, that was getting underway in the 1970s, and it was going to require displacing thousands of residents of South LA who are, disproportionately Black, Latino, non-white residents of the region. And it went through a 20-year process that included a federal civil rights consent decree because of the violation of the rights of the residents, that they were being singled out for demolition of their homes to route this freeway, while more affluent, whiter communities were spared freeway construction. And I think one of the things that I would prioritize in terms of our transportation investments going forward is repairing the harms of the past. We've had programs under the bipartisan infrastructure law called Reconnecting Communities.
Yep, that was Biden's first big climate and clean energy investment law before the Inflation Reduction Act.
That's right. And California's, advanced similar projects where, instead of thinking, how do we, add one more lane to this freeway, what if we had Caltrans engineers come out to the communities that have freeways through them right now and let's try to walk to school. Let's try to walk to the grocery store, getting across this huge freeway infrastructure with cars zooming on and off on-ramps, and you feel like you're taking your life into your own hands trying to cross the street. And there's so much more we could do to, make the places next to freeways where people were not just displaced, but people who live there are breathing worse air. We know that if you live within 1,000 feet of a freeway, you have a greater increased likelihood of asthma or heart disease. How can we repair the communities that are being bisected by huge freeway structures to invest in parks and wider sidewalks and crosswalks and bus shelters and shade trees and the whole suite of things? I think we're starting to get there. as I said, reconnecting communities is pushing some great projects forward. And the 710 corridor down to Long Beach was another project that was long in the works to widen the 710 from downtown LA, kind of east of downtown LA, past all the warehouses down to the Port of Los Angeles. And it was going to put hundreds, if not thousands, of more diesel trucks on the freeway along this corridor in the communities that are already breathing poor air. And that project was stopped in part because of the US EPA saying, there's no way you can do this and, not be violating the Clean Air Act. And so that sent Caltrans and LA Metro, the project partners, back to the drawing board. And I think it led to somewhere really productive, which is they engaged with community groups to kind of answer these questions that I was raising. What are the kinds of mobility investments you need in your community? How can we make investments that reduce the impacts of the freeway in your community? So as a result, instead of getting billions invested in more concrete, we're getting billions invested in, capturing stormwater on city streets so it's not going into, storm drain channels and out to the ocean, and more shade trees and crosswalks and truck chargers so that the trucks that are on the corridor can be electric and have places to charge. So I think there's a path forward. We know what we need to do. And like I was saying, there's just a lot of projects that we know are harmful that are still in the pipeline. And they will only get out of the pipeline if we choose to take them out of the pipeline. And with our advocacy against I-80, we are trying to get Caltrans in this case to say, you need to take this widening out of the pipeline and put in the pipeline something better, something that's going to help people get around without putting more cars on the road.
Let's talk about LA for a minute. There is a lot of public transit expansion happening in Los Angeles right now, a lot of rail development or metro development. And in theory, some of it's supposed to happen before the 2028 Olympics. We'll see how much happens before the 2028 Olympics. I'm fine if it happens by 2029 too. I'll, still be here and still excited to take the train. You sent me an email the other day when we were preparing for this. You called the Wilshire subway extension, which is going to go from Koreatown to Westwood. You called it the most important urban transit project in the country. And I just got so excited when I saw you call it that. Tell me why that's the case. What's so cool about that project?
I just pinch myself every time I think about this because it is such an important project. And LA has done a remarkable thing. It has been rebuilding its rail infrastructure for 34 years, and it has not yet managed to build the most important line in the entire system.
This is going to go from West LA to downtown, basically.
Exactly.
I grew up in West LA. I'd love to be able to take the train downtown and back.
It's going to just unlock everything about the transit system we already have. You will be able to, walk down from Westwood, hop on the subway at Wilshire and Westwood, and zoom to Union Station in 25 minutes, or to Langer's Deli in 18 minutes, or to Koreatown in 15 minutes. The speed at which you will be able to move is just better than any other way you can get around. Only at 2 a.m, going illegally fast on the 10 freeway could you, do better than this. And that's just going to remap what people think about mobility in the region. If you are a, student at UCLA or you work at a hotel in Westwood, you will be closer living in Koreatown than you would be if you lived in student housing in Palms in terms of the travel time from where you live to where you need to go. It's going to be 15 minutes from Koreatown or a 25-minute bus ride from Palms. So
I live in Palms now, and that's crazy to me.
Yeah, and so the Wilshire is the one project that I think people are underestimating, even though everyone knows it's going to be great. I think we're underestimating how much it's going to change sort of Angelenos' self-perception and our identity of, we can really be a transit city where transit is not just an option that's there in case your car's in the shop or you can't afford a car. It is a preferred option no matter what your mobility choices are available to you. And I think the only project that I would say maybe surpasses that is, when we build rail under the Sepulveda Pass. I think the two of those things are just going to link, these real sort of choke points in our region where you cannot cram any more cars through this part of the region. And so we need high capacity electric rail that's going to move 1,000 people per train.
Question, though, if we've been working on this transit expansion for 34 years in the city of LA, and so much of it is just now coming to fruition, in the next few years, I know I keep using this phrase permitting reform, but why did it take so long? Was it government bureaucracy reviewing stuff? Was it opposition from homeowners along the route? Was there funding needed from agencies that didn't have? What was the holdup?
I think it's just a feature of there was a lot to do, and we know it's just going to take a lot of time. It took us like 100 years to get to where we are, and hopefully we can rebuild a better infrastructure network around transit in half that time.
Hopefully, though, that's the problem. It's
Yeah.
like it can't be hopefully. We've got to go real fast on climate change. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. You do this for a living, but it's like we don't have hopefully time. Like we can't afford to spend 30 years rebuilding stuff.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of things. There's a great book on this called Rail Town by Ethan Elkind, and he gets into the case of the Wilshire subway. There was a methane gas explosion from a naturally occurring pocket of methane kind of near the liberated tar pits that exploded and damaged a Ross Dress for Less. And that was something onto which a lot of people projected their anxiety about public transit, and it led to this backlash where the federal government banned tunneling under Wilshire Boulevard. And then you fast forward 30 years and traffic only got worse, tunneling technology improved, and so we, got the law repealed that banned the tunneling under Wilshire. And so, that corridor is just ripe for transit. It's got all of the jobs and homes along the entire stretch between downtown and the west side. And so that was a project that hit a snag because of geology. Other times it's funding, and sometimes you'll have a federal administration that is a real constructive partner, and sometimes you have one that's trying to claw back money that they've already contractually obligated to the transit agency.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Hi, my name is Mary Knopf, and I'm a producer on Boiling Point. We are here with Joanne O'Neill, Director of Customer Programs at Clean Power Alliance. Hi, Joanne.
Hello.
Clean Power Alliance offers many customer programs to save on electricity bills and conserve energy. What is Power Response? How can listeners participate, and are there any incentives for signing up?
Yeah, so CPA offers various energy and cost savings programs to its customers. One of these programs is Power Response, where participants can earn money for saving energy when energy demand is higher than expected. By saving energy and earning money during these events, Power Response program helps increase the reliability of the power grid and lowers greenhouse gas emissions in the local community.
Well, thank you so much, Joanne.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Take the next step in building a more resilient and clean energy future for Southern California. To learn more, please visit cleanpoweralliance.org/powerresponse. Again, that's cleanpoweralliance.org/powerresponse.
How does housing intersect with your work on transportation, and what, if anything, do you think California could or should be doing to get more housing built in places that are closer to where they work or served by transit rather than just sprawling out into the hinterlands where folks are just going to drive more? What's the status there?
We're in a big hole in terms of housing production at all levels of affordability, and so there's a lot to do. I think the thing that most directly intersects with my work on transportation is that in the last several years, the state legislature, many cities have identified that areas near public transit stops are the areas they want to grow. And so they are changing the housing laws in the city to allow taller buildings with more units, often connected to incentives for providing dedicated affordable units, on land that is within walking distance of a transit station. Usually it's a half mile or something along those lines. And you could look at the Transit-Oriented Communities program in Los Angeles, which, lets you build, taller. And as the taller you build, the more affordable units you have to provide. And there's, an incentive and a nexus between what you're building and the benefits to the community. And that's been a really well-utilized program because there's, value in it for the organization building the housing to get, they get faster approvals, they get to build more units, and in exchange, they're also setting aside affordable units. And to me, that says, well, if we know that works, then one of the ways we can expand the reach of that kind of program is to bring more transit online. So we have this sort of double dip of we open up a transit stop or a frequent bus line, and then at the same time, we're enabling more housing to be incentivized to go up around that area.
Do you think there are ways to keep expanding that? I mean, I like the idea of those two things working in tandem. I mean, it's like a virtuous cycle, right? More transit, more housing, more transit. I mean, one of the roadblocks there, I assume, is that, kind of a NIMBY backlash, which is probably one of the problems with any type of building more of anything. You get people who don't want more residents in their neighborhood and people who don't want more transit. I mean, how much does that come up in the work that you do, folks who just want things to sort of stay exactly as they are? Is that a real problem that you encounter a lot, or is that more of a sort of a straw man caricature that gets thrown around, or somewhere in the middle?
I think the thing that helps me maintain perspective is looking at the outcomes of our elections. So voters in LA County have approved taxing ourselves 4 times to build public transit in 1980, 1990, 2008, and 2016 by two-thirds majorities for the last 2 votes.
Because you need 2/3 to pass the tax measure in LA County.
That's right. And in LA City, voters recently approved the Healthy Streets LA measure.
That was Measure HLA just in the most recent election cycle, right?
Yeah, that's right. And that is there to ensure the city is installing, the transit and bike and pedestrian projects that are in their plans every time they're repaving the street. And that passed with over 60% of the vote. And so when you take the temperature of the electorate, they really like this stuff. They vote for it. They vote for housing bonds. They vote for transit infrastructure. And then on a project-by-project basis, if you say, we're going to host a community meeting at an inconvenient time and, come out and tell us what you think, that's kind of a structure for community engagement where you're going to get the people who have the most anxiety to come, because they are the ones, it's that sort of anxiety response is like a very motivating response to go, come out and express concerns. And we've done a lot of community meetings like that in the planning profession for a very long time. And I think it can kind of give you this unrepresentative perception of what the public thinks. And so that's why I think, look at the outcomes of these elections. People really support these types of investments. They're willing to embrace some change in their community. People want to be able to see their kids grow up and stay in the community. And, if every city and every part of each city committed and said, okay, we'll allow hundreds of units here, hundreds of units there, that adds up if we all work together. And if we're in a kind of zero-sum thinking where, well, I don't want to contribute to the solution because I don't think my neighboring city is going to do it, that's when we get stuck.
By the way, for those who are listening to this and thinking maybe you're a hypocrite, I did drive to get to the LA Times office today, but you told me that you took the bus here from Santa Monica.
I did. It was partly a matter of necessity, but it also reflects the abundance of transportation choices I have in Santa Monica. My mother-in-law's in town, and she's borrowing our car. So I hopped on the number 3 bus, which goes down Lincoln Boulevard from Santa Monica all the way to El Segundo to the airport. And it's just such an interesting scan kind of through the walk of life of Los Angeles. Lots of high school students and service workers and travelers kind of cruising up and down this corridor. Lincoln is like an iconically kind of grim streetscape, just like scarcely a tree in sight. It is perhaps, tellingly a street that Caltrans owns. But they
didn't know that.
Yeah, it's State Route 1 south of Santa Monica. So, but, to their credit, just in my inbox this morning, I got a message saying that they're exploring adding dedicated bus lanes on Lincoln Boulevard. And I think that'd be fantastic because if you could have, as my friend Bryn Monchelsea, who works for Climate Resolve, has said, if we could have a buffet of transportation options, then I think everyone would be a lot happier. And, if there were bus lanes on Lincoln Boulevard, I probably would have got down here in like 45 minutes instead of an hour. And I would have been able to scarf down my lunch a little bit more slowly before we jumped in the conversation.
Well, there you go. And with apologies for the unfortunate implication I might have just made that if you drive, you're a hypocrite, didn't mean to say that. See my previous articles where I've explained why that's not the case. But Carter, thank you very much for being with us on the Boiling Point podcast.
It's my pleasure, Sammy. Thank you.
By the way, after we stopped recording, Carter checked the distance between Interstate 80, that freeway outside of Sacramento, and the Amtrak rail corridor that runs parallel to the freeway. 138 feet. For the record, I have no idea how far I can throw a baseball. Thank you for listening to Boiling Point. I'm your host, Sammy Roth. My producers are Mary Knopf and Jonathan Shiflett. Sound design and original music by Jonathan Shiflett. Elijah Wolfson is our editor. Denise Callahan is our studio manager. Ben Church is our production manager. Nick Norton is our engineer. Special thanks to LA Times studio president Anna Magzanian, president and chief operating officer of the Los Angeles Times Chris Argentieri, and executive editor of the Los Angeles Times Terry Tang. Boiling Point is executive produced by Darius Derrickson and created by me, Sammy Roth.
Who's abducting 100,000 children in China each year? And how was a cult where paedophilia, murder and torture were commonplace allowed to operate in Chile for nearly 4 decades? At True Crime Reports, a new video podcast from Al Jazeera, we'll investigate these stories from the global south and beyond. True crimes that often haven't reached the headlines in the West. I'm Hala Mohieddin. In each episode, we'll take you to a different country. You'll hear from experts and first-hand accounts from those right at the heart of these stories. True Crime Reports. Find us under Al Jazeera's YouTube channel podcast tab and wherever you get your podcasts.